Alright, it's April 13th and I am here at Antelope Island. I'm going to be walking into the Great Salt Lake and talking about that. Never actually done that before, but I have been here before. This is in particular Bridger Bay. So yeah, let's see what happens. One thing that immediately strikes me at the beach here is that it's all rock. There's no shells here because nothing really lives in the Great Salt Lake that could produce shells. So the beach, it's got like at first appearance, a regular sort of appearance, but when you look closer, it's all just rock and sand. There's no shells or anything that you might normally find inside the beach. So I'm actually in the water. I'll talk about the lake a little bit. Now, it is the largest lake west of the Mississippi River by surface area. By volume, however, it is actually not that large. It is quite shallow, so there are a few lakes that beat it out in terms of volume, like Lake Tahoe or Pyramid Lake in Nevada. It is really only about 16 feet deep on average, and that can vary quite a lot depending on how much the water level has changed lately. And at its deepest point, I don't think ever more than 40 feet deep, and usually not that much. But regardless, it's still the largest lake in terms of surface area west of the Mississippi. Now, as the name implies, Great Salt Lake is quite salty. The main body of the lake has a salinity of about 12%, which is give or take 3 or 4 times more salty than the ocean is. And the north arm of the Great Salt Lake, which is separated from the rest of the lake by a causeway for which the train runs over, is about 28% salinity, which is extremely salty, about 9 or 10 times saltier than the ocean is. And in fact, it's so salty that really nothing even lives there except for this one species of algae that has a very cool red color and makes the water look quite pink. I hope I can show you that one day, but as right now, I'm just going to be stuck here where it's just a low 12% salinity. Now, the Great Salt Lake used to be a much larger Lake Bonneville, which was, during the last ice age, a huge lake which stretched from much of western Utah into Idaho and Nevada. It was a freshwater lake at that time, and it was much deeper, up to 800 feet deep. Now, at Red Rock Pass in Idaho, there was an exit where Lake Bonneville could then flow into the Snake River. And for a while, it was stable at this level. But eventually, the rock gave way there, and suddenly the lake had to drain 400 feet down, and it did so in an incredibly dramatic fashion. The flood that resulted from this giveaway of rock was so incredible and so massive that it was greater than the entire flow of every other river on Earth for the whole year that this happened. It completely reshaped the Snake River plain and carved out much of the Snake River Canyon. And afterwards, again, the lake was 400 feet less deep than it was before. Now, since the end of the last ice age, Lake Bonneville has dried up almost completely, leaving behind only the Great Salt Lake, Utah Lake, and Sevier Lake, which is in most years completely dry anyways, as remnants. And the only reason why there's anything left at all is because the Wasatch and Uinta Mountains get high snowfall in the winter, which in the summertime melts and then runs off into these lakes, keeping alive through the dry summer months. Throughout the rest of the Great Basin, there were other prehistoric Pleistocene lakes that are now completely gone, and the only other places where they occur, such as Pyramid Lake or Walker Lake in western Nevada, are places where they get fed by high summer runoff from other mountain ranges. Now, the ecosystem of the Great Salt Lake is quite basic, as one might imagine. There's not a lot of species that can tolerate such high salinity levels. There's no fish that live in the lake except for in the river deltas. There's no crustaceans or anything like that except for brine shrimp, which I'll talk about in a second. And there's no typical aquatic vegetation. What there is a lot of is bacteria and algae, and species adapted to thrive on the high levels of salinity found throughout the lake. And these species have grown at great abundance and feed the aforementioned brine shrimp and brine flies. Now, brine flies in their larval stage grow primarily in the bottom of the lake sediment, feeding upon the microbial mats that develop there, while the brine shrimp live in the water column, feeding upon the free-floating algae. And eventually, brine flies will pupate and hatch and become typical flies. Now, these two invertebrates feed a ton of migratory birds which stop by, such as Wilson's phalarope, the American avocet, eared grebes, a number of seagulls and American pelicans, much of which I think actually live here year-round. But regardless, they feed some 7 million birds which stop by the lake on their annual migration path. So it's a pretty important spot for a lot of migratory birds. It is indeed, like, again, the largest lake west of Mississippi, so it's going to be a natural target for a lot of wetland species. Now, I guess I'll take some time to answer a few questions about the Great Salt Lake, so you might have. Big one is going to be, does the lake smell? The answer is maybe. It depends on where you're at. Like right here, it does smell a little bit, but it's not particularly bad. I mean, it doesn't smell that much worse than some other lakes I visited. Like lakes in general, I don't think smell that great, but the lake does indeed have a lake stench if you're around Farmington Bay, and that is because a lot of sewage runs off into the lake there, feeding of algae, which create massive blooms and creating a quite disgusting stench. So, and that's really, I think, a large reason of why the Great Salt Lake has its reputation for being so smelly. Otherwise, it's actually not that bad, I don't think. And also, if you go near the shore, it'll be often like a wetland environment, and wetlands always stink, so you shouldn't be too surprised that that happens. And like, for example, I've been actually boating on the middle of the lake, and it smells like nothing out there. It smells perfectly fine, maybe a little salty, but I don't think you can really complain about that. Now, another question, where is the best place to see the lake? I couldn't tell you, but I do think Antelope Island is a great one, and the Great Salt Lake State Park is another popular place for many people to go and see the lake. Great Salt Lake State Park is indeed a bit closer to Salt Lake City, I believe, so that's a good option as well. I got a whole field of thrombolites here. These are basically, well, first of all, they're normally covered by water, but since the lake level's been low, they are exposed now. What they are is basically colonies of bacteria that cement minerals around them, creating these rocks over time. Now, so you might be thinking I meant to say stromatolite, but no, I do mean thrombolite here. And a thrombolite is basically, there's a difference between a thrombolite and a stromatolite. A thrombolite has sort of no pattern to it. It's not layered at all, while stromatolites are created in layers. So yeah, there's quite a lot of them here. I was not expecting to find so many. Thought that'd be maybe a bit of a more trickier thing to come across here, but it's pretty cool. A lot of people suspect that thrombolites and stromatolites were some of the first life forms on Earth, or the first forms that life occurred on in Earth historically. Some other places to see from thrombolites and stromatolites include some parts of the Bahamas and lakes in Western Australia, or as well as Hamelin Pool around Shark Bay, also in Western Australia. I do intend to come back here at some point. I chose a fairly bad day. Well, it wasn't my choice. It's the day I had off, but this is not the best day to visit the lake. It's quite cold, and there's another flies or brine shrimp I can show you. And another kind of interesting thing that happens is after brine flies hatch, all of their egg cases wash ashore in like in the billions, which create these quite disgusting mounds actually. And I would like to show that, but this is the wrong time. So hopefully I can come back in like a month and a half, 2 months from now, and show you what it looks more like in the summertime on a hopefully sunnier day. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.